Stannic Group N Racing was treated to a growth spurt this year, when the Class E Brat Pack suddenly more than doubled in size. With a reputation for being the nursery school for young motor racing drivers, the Class E competitors have proved to be more than just a starting point, but have within their ranks a group of highly talented, mature racing drivers. Early in the season, Opel and Nissan's promise to help first-time drivers saw a new wave of Class E competition. Sean Watson-Smith was quick to show his intentions. Winning both heats at Kyalami on February the 1st, he went down to Cape Town with much the same intention. Heat 1 saw local lad Carl Moller out in front. With pressure mounting from Watson-Smith, Moller went late on the brakes in Stannic and watched as Sean took the lead and the race. Mark Edwards came second, with Moller holding on to third. Heat 2 saw Moller and Watson-Smith tangle again at Stannic Corner, this time with just a few hundred meters to go. Carl crossed the line first, his right-hand front tyre torn into shreds. Round 3 in Port Elizabeth saw Watson-Smith on his home track. All the opposition saw was the back end of his car as he notched up a quick 18 points. Carl Moller scored 2 seconds, with Mark Edwards third in both heats after an enormous tussle with Steve Wyndham. The Unos were starting to make their mark, although they brought with them strange new ideas in aerodynamics. 2 races at Kyalami went the way of Mike O'Sullivan and Mark Edwards respectively, before the Stannic Group N Nationals moved back to the coast and the more exciting East London circuit. Both heats were won in a runaway-type victory by Sean Watson-Smith. The racing in the class was for second and third places, where Mark and Mike continued their battle, surrounded by a bunch of Opel Cubs. Ex-motorcycle and fast becoming a highly competitive Stannic Group N driver, Lawrence Boshoff, pulled off a classic four-wheel high side when he went off the road at Rifle while in full flight. Carl Moller, always very much part of the pack, overdid things, putting his car on its side against the tires. The tight and tricky bends of Swartkorps ensure good racing, and the Stannic Group N Class E cars were to be no exception. Devon Juby started to make his mark on the front pack, joining O'Sullivan, Edwards and Watson-Smith in a four-way tussle for the lead. When Watson-Smith made his move on the leaders, he never considered that Devon Juby would stand his ground through Sabat. The points in Heat 1 went to Mike O'Sullivan. In Heat 2, the huge Class E field once again provided the action. Firstly, Claudio Piazzamusso crashed his Uno in front of the Basel corner crowd. Then, just moments later, Carl Moller rolled his Opel dramatically in front of the main stand at Conti Corner.
Well, as it stands now, we've got four national races that I have to win to win the championship, unless Sean Watson-Smith has a bad off. So the pressure's great at the moment.
Mark Edwards knew that he had a hard day's work on his hands when he arrived at the Goldfields Raceway for the penultimate round of the championship. To stay in the running, he had to break Sean Watson-Smith's run of wins. Within lap 1 of the first heat, Watson-Smith had pulled a lead on the group, who all saw second place as the big prize for the day. O'Sullivan and Edwards now had Devon Juby, Lindsay Stain and Lawrence Boshoff in tow. Class E had come of age. This was no longer a motorsport nursery school. This was the real thing, and racing was serious. Late in Heat 1, under pressure from Mike O'Sullivan, Mark overcooked things and had to fight hard to secure third place. Heat 2 went much the same way, with Sean out in front and Mark managing to hold second place ahead of Mike O'Sullivan. Devon Juby and Lawrence Boshoff fought hard for 4th and 5th places, the two drivers eventually splitting the points after the day's racing. With 3 straight wins under his belt in a row, Sean Watson-Smith arrived at Kyalami for the final round of the Nationals with a Class E championship already secured. 21 points separated him from Edwards. The heats were eventful and hard-fought, but at the end of the day, Sean Watson-Smith again dominated, winning both heats outright, securing his first position in the Stannic Group N Class E Championship. Second was Mark Edwards, and third, Mike O'Sullivan. Class D was one of the classes in the 1992 Stannic Group N season that had no factory support, thereby giving the class total privateer status. Two old hands in Stannic Group N Racing, Kurt Alchen and Brian Gilmore, were joined by young Cape-based driver who very early in the season started stamping his intentions all over the Class D score sheets. Kyalami was difficult for Geniel de Villiers. The likes of Derek Irving and Steve Corner started the season strongly, forcing the young driver down to the 5th and 6th placings. When the races moved to Cape Town and Port Elizabeth for the coastal legs of the championships, Corner stayed at home on the Highveld, leaving Derek Irving, the cat among the pigeons, at the Killarney meeting. While Derek was able to dominate at Kyalami, Kurt Alchen fended off the karting champions' attack at Killarney, eventually winning both heats. At Aldo Scribanti, Brian Gilmore and Geniel de Villiers took over the attack on the flying Alchen, Irving for some reason unable to stay with the pace. As one of the most visually exciting contests in Group N racing, these Class D cars brought the crowds to their feet at all the race meetings, but most noticeably at the East London and tight Swartkop circuits. The East London round eventually went the way of Kurt Alchen, but the fight was relentless, with all three drivers capable of winning either of the two heats. At Swartkops, a fourth force joined the fray. Having taken pole position, Steve Corner was under pressure to keep his Cornwright Motors cadet ahead of the likes of Kurt, Brian and Geniel. Derek had departed from the South African motor racing scene to drive in the World Karting Series in Europe. Geniel and Kurt shared a win apiece, but not without tremendous pressure from Gilmore. This Class D contest was racing at its best, and both heats were tremendous crowd pleasers. Geniel de Villiers claimed all the points at Kyalami and Killarney, where Don Cray rejoined the class in his hometown. With 2 rounds to go, Nissan joined in the fun with a Nissan Sentra driven by Hannes Grobler. Steve Corner was back in the running as well, but the championship was far from over, and Alchen and de Villiers both needed the points. The two heats became an all-or-nothing battle, and both drivers managed a first and second between them. Kurt Alchen arrived at Kyalami with a healthy 20-point lead and went on to win both heats, securing him the Class D Stannic Group N championships. Second was Geniel de Villiers, and third, Brian Gilmore. Like Class D, Class C was to be raced without any quarter given or taken. Grant van Schalkwyk started the season as a likely winner, but without sponsorship, the young driver had plenty to consider from the factory-backed Opel driver Neil Stephen. To make matters more competitive, the Toyota Motorsport team arrived at the opening round of the Nationals at Kyalami with a determined Mike White in a rather fast-looking conquest. Driving a second car sponsored by Automark Racing was young Charles Wilkin. Port Elizabeth's Aldo Scribanti produced some hairy moments for the Class C leaders, as firstly Neil Stephen overcooked things through the Conti S's, giving Mike White the first heat on a plate. In Heat 2, it was Mike who battled to find the line, almost flipping the conquest twice. Sandwiched between these two, van Schalkwyk scored a second place in both heats. A full month and a half later, at the Killarney racetrack, nothing had changed. The two Opels claimed the front of the grid, with White nipping at their heels. In Heat 2, White locked his wheels into Stannic Bend, the resulting 360-degree spin putting him out of contention. Grant and Neil went on to one of the closest finishes witnessed this season. At Kyalami just 2 weeks later, Grant made full use of the Opel's top-end speed, winning the one-heat race and taking the 18 points ahead of Mike White and Chris Clark in their Toyota conquests. Just 1 week later, the battle was to continue at the Killarney racetrack near Cape Town. Mike White had to concede pole position to the two Opels. On this occasion, the Class C cars would race ahead of the Class E pack in both heats. Half a lap into Heat 1, a determined Mike White found his first victim. Neil Stephen gave Mike just the smallest gap into Stannic Bend, which he used to full effect. The remaining laps were spent charging down on the heels of Grant van Schalkwyk. In the very last lap, White made his move under braking into Stannic, taking Heat 1 from Grant and a frustrated Neil Stephen. In Heat 2, the Opels launched a counter-attack on Mike White. Mike looked doomed as the Opels came at him from both sides into Continental Corner. But not to be caught asleep, White stood on his brakes, causing Stephen to collide into van Schalkwyk, while Mike escaped the incident with just a wrecked front bumper. While Grant was able to rejoin the race fairly quickly, Neil needed help getting out of the sand trap. As Mike led Charles Wilken and Sagrin Nair around the Killarney track, Grant van Schalkwyk slowly started a brave fight back, overtaking both Sagrin and Charles on his way to the leader, Mike White. Mike managed to fight off the attack, winning the second heat and claiming the maximum points for the day. It had been a tough day in the office for the Toyota driver. Grant arrived at the final round of the championships not only feeling confident, but looking good. Having run unsponsored all season, Grant arrived at Kyalami flying the Penthouse banner, the sleek lines of the Cadet, outmatched only by the sleek lines of the Penthouse Pit. Out on the circuit, it was Mike White who had all the right lines. Running on his own in front of the Class E competition, the racing was behind him for second place between Van Schalkwyk, Wilken, Clark and Stephen. His two second placings were all that Grant van Schalkwyk needed to secure the Class C Stannic Group N honours. Second was Mike White and third Neil Stephen. The Class B grid remained unoccupied until the penultimate round of the 1992 Stannic Group N Championship. Nick de Waal arrived at Welkom in a Nissan Motorsport Sentra, while Martinus Breers, who had previously competed in 5 Class C races, arrived with a Class B Golf. Martinus won both heats at Welkom in a hard-fought two-man dice. At Kyalami a month later, the situation remained unchanged, with just the 2 Class B cars on the grid. Just a few laps into the first heat, Martinez found himself with his heart in his mouth as he spun his Golf perilously close to the Armco. We watch in slow motion as Martinez keeps the car he has prepared for the forthcoming Castrol 9-hour endurance challenge in one piece. The only reported damage was one bent bumper. Nick went on to win both heats, the Sentra much improved from its debut outing just 1 month before. Stannic congratulate and thank Nissan, Nick and Martinez for taking up the Class B challenge. The 1992 Stannic Group N Class A Championship was set to be a humdinger before the first car rolled onto the newly completed Kyalami Grand Prix circuit. Having lost the 1991 Class A Championship to Opel, and more specifically Mike Briggs, BMW's Tony Viana set out to start the season well, and he did just that, beating Briggs into second place in both heats. Robbie Smith, having committed himself to the Inland Championship and the associated national races, had a bad start to the season when his JSN Motors BMW failed to complete the first heat. Peter Lance, who had made the same commitment to the inland races only, retired his BMW in much the same fashion. At Killarney, later in February, local lad John Craig showed the factory teams the way around during practice and secured pole position for Heat 1. As the race started, Craig kept his lead, and Tony Viana found himself behind 3 very quick Opels. Mike Briggs managed to pass John Craig by outbraking him into Stannic Bend. Craig lost his second place to Roddy Turner on the final lap, but Tony Viana had to be content with a 4th place and the 3 points that go with it. In Heat 2, as the cars sped down into Conti Corner, both Roddy Turner and Grant McCleary became the first victims of what was to become a scrappy Class A race.
As they head for Conti Corner on the first turn. And this is a high-speed traffic jam as they go in, and anything can happen, and it does. Neil Brink goes into the side of Grant McCleary, spins them right round a 360 as the traffic rushes past, trying to avoid them all. Here it is from the outside. Briggs in the front. Then it's Viana. Roddy Turner on the outside getting pushed there by Dean Joubert, goes into the side of him in the Winfield BMW. No brake lights. He just keeps spinning him around. Neil Brink doesn't see the traffic jam. He goes into the side of McCleary and spins him around right in the middle of that pack. Here it is again from the inside of Viana's car. Joubert closes right up on Viana's tail and goes into the side of Turner and starts to spin him around. Just keeps accelerating away, pushes him out of the way, and Leon Maria takes his chances as mechanical mayhem is left down there at Conti Corner.
Well clear of the trouble, Mike Briggs soon pulled a healthy lead. Tony Viana, also unaffected in Conti, slipped into second place behind Briggs. This second place was soon threatened by Leon Marais, who for a few laps put Tony under immense pressure. While Viana successfully fought off Leon's attack, Dion Joubert inched his way up to an attacking position on the Alboranti Opel. Roger McCleary takes up on the action to the end of the race.
As he goes into Castle Corner, but Joubert has joined the fray, goes on the inside, just shoulders him out of the way. He's done it to the second Opel, sends him pushed to the outside of Castle Corner, and Joubert now has got himself into third position. But Marais reckons that's where he wants to be. He sees Blood, this former Mirage pilot, knows a thing or two about fighting as he closes on him. This is going to be desperate stuff before the end of this race. And here's the battle up front. This is for second position. Joubert closing on Viana and gets pushed out of the way by Marais. He just came out of the sun at him, pushed him out of the way, and Marais says, my rightful place was in third position, and that's where I mean to be. Viana is in second. Marais is third, but in the front it's Michael Briggs going for his second win of the day. And this is going to be the first time ever that Super Bosses have had two straight victories against the Winfield BMW. Here comes Briggs, here's Tony Viana, still full of fight, and Leon Marais in the Albaranti Delta Super Boss, a great third position after a big fight.
If Tony was to battle at Killarney, worse was to come, as the Stannic Group N Championship moved to the tricky, tight Aldo Scribanti circuit near Port Elizabeth. In Heat 1, Mike Briggs shot into the lead on his hometown circuit. Leon Marais took second position after a brief tussle with Dion Joubert and managed to hold this place for the remainder of the race. Tony Viana started in the middle of the Class A pack and battled to better his position thereafter. Heat 2 was a carbon copy of the first race, with Briggs ahead of Marais. Dion Joubert was taken care of by Roddy Turner, an incident which promoted Tony Viana to third place and allowed Grant McCleary to score a fourth. With two championship events won in a row, Mike Briggs was on a roll. BMW arrived at Killarney in April with two brand new Winfield 325 ISs. Killarney had favoured the Opel Superbosses, and the fourth round of the championships were to be no exception. The new BMWs proved to be quicker than the old cars, and the Opel camp were taken by surprise when the two BMs filled the front row of the grid. Tony Viana had developed a new car and was obviously putting the extra horsepower to good use. John Craig literally got rid of Dion Joubert in Stannic Bend, leaving a fight open for second place. Having secured the second place, Mike Briggs set about the task of demoting Tony Viana. The closing laps of this race had to be one of the hardest fought moments in Stannic Group N racing history.
And Mike Briggs takes victory as he closes in on the Winfield BMW. Lovely angle as we go in with Tony Viana, hard at work. He hasn't got Joubert riding shotgun for him, but he's got a very determined Michael Briggs just behind him. He wants a maiden victory for this motor car. And here we are in the final stage of this race. And Peter Laird giving Michael Briggs instructions as he goes for the inside of Volkswagen corner. Sweet revenge for the way that Viana handled him at an early encounter here at Killarney. And Briggs has got the advantage round the double right-handed Sabre, and also down the long straight as they go down to Stannic. It's ABS braking for the BMW's locked wheels for the Opel as he goes in there, slides across the road. Viana's going to try and nip through the inside as he does there. But it's all happiness for Peter Laird and his team standing there. What Briggs is doing on the road with 200 metres to go is all he wants as he comes to the line just 0.05 of a second ahead of Tony Viana. Michael Briggs comes into the Winfield pit to shake Tony Viana's hand for a very clean race as we spoke to Michael Briggs.
Things turned out my way, and once I sort of sensed the blood, I went in for the kill. And with Tony, you can always race like a gentleman, and he made it difficult for me, but the gap was there and I took it.
You're getting too old for this?
Not really. I think I forgot how it feels like to be in front, you know. And I thought, well, what am I doing here, you know? But eventually I saw the Opel coming up. I tried to play it because the biggest thing is the tyres and brakes, so you have to look after it. And eventually I was charging more and more, and I started running out of brakes and tyres, and the handling, you know, got worse and worse, and that was it. Instead of, you didn't go quicker, I went slower, and that's it. So hopefully next heat we better have a better plan.
Heat 1 had set the mood for what the Class A pace was to be in Heat 2. There was just too much traffic and not enough road, as the BMWs and Opels bumped and pushed their way into spaces that didn't really exist. Someone had to suffer the inevitable. Grant McCleary, with our in-car camera, became the victim to Hannes Oosthuizen. In this race, it was Tony Viana who had to do the chasing, while Mike Briggs had to shut down every possible chance that the cunning old fox behind him might decide to take. The new BMW machinery had worked, and nobody knew that better than Mike Briggs, who, despite his wins at Killarney, arrived at Kyalami in May a very worried man. BMW took full advantage of the long Kyalami circuit, Viana leading in Dion Joubert in a show of strength, which for nearly 3 months took the sting out of Stannic Group N racing. The departure from Kyalami had not been the end of Mike's problems. The Opals desperately needed to get back onto the tight coastal tracks, where the BMWs battled to put their newfound power to full advantage. East London was not that type of track.
At the moment, the BM is definitely the stronger of the two cars. It's 700 cc's bigger than us, and they've done a lot of work, and they made the car work for them. Their braking is also pretty good. And it's actually quite strange. The two cars that are so different are so close in lap times. But at the moment, unfortunately, they've got the slight edge on us.
Tony started fast and never looked back. Behind the leading BMW, Mike Briggs and Dion Joubert fought briefly for second place. With that matter settled, the East London spectators had to look down the field for the Class A entertainment.
Here's Grant McCleary, trying to retain his 4th position or get it back from John Craig. He gets nudged by Craig, loses in the infield, and really has to work hard in that motor car to recover from things. Craig gets back 4th position, and McCleary's gone back to 5th. Here's another moment of action. We're in with Leon Marais as he goes through the S's. He gets a nudge from the back there, and who's it this time? It's Farouk Danga. Clarksdorp's Businessman of the Year is giving them the business down here at East London as they fight for control over the bumps of the sweep as they come up to Beacon Bend on the last lap of this race. And it's Tony Viana and Dion Joubert, 1-2 for the Winfield BMW team. Michael Briggs comes through in 3rd position. Then it's John Craig, Grant McCleary and Roddy Turner.
Heat 1 seemed predictable, but the fighter in Mike Briggs was about to change all that. The results of the previous heat had just pushed Tony Viana into a 2-point lead over Briggs on the championship table. As expected, Tony Viana used his pole position advantage to shoot his BMW into a commanding lead. For Briggs to win, he had to take the BMs on one at a time. Pushing his cadet to its absolute limit, Mike held the inside line into Copacabana and pushed Viana's barrier, Dion Joubert, back into 3rd place. While Briggs set about Viana's bumper, the rest of the Class A cars were fighting for the lower order positions. Briggs spent the entire race working his way towards Tony's tail end. Inches lost down the long main straight were retrieved through the bends. Behind them, a war was being waged between Hannes Oosthuizen and Farouk Dangor. The situation was quickly sorted out. With a flag out and waiting, Mike Briggs took the lead from Tony in a skillful piece of driving that had the crowd up and on their feet. But as the leaders rounded Beacon and headed for the line, Mike missed a gear, and Tony, as surprised as Mike, clinched the 2nd heat. From the coast, the Stannic Group N circus moved inland to the tight but highly entertaining Swartkorps Raceway. Just as Tony Viana had taken a lead in the championship, fate stepped in and robbed Tony of his best chance of a Class A championship victory since 1988. Illness kept Tony in bed all that day, and down on the start line, Dion Joubert said it all.
I feel a bit lonely without Tony to sort of support me, or for me to support him, but I'll do my best.
What's the story there? Is the guy sick?
Tony's very ill. You know, if Tony doesn't come to a race meeting, you know, he's very ill. He's not a normal person, you know. So he's, hopefully by Kyalami he'll be healthy again.
You don't think the attraction was to stay at home and watch the rugby test?
I don't think so, no.
As the lights turned green for the first heat, Dion sprang into the lead with Mike Briggs in close attendance behind him. Leon Marais had anxious moments as the bunch entered Conti Corner for the first time. With 2 wheels up in the air, Leon used an unsuspecting Peter Lance to bring him back down to earth. The race was hard fought in the middle field, with Dion leading from start to finish and Mike unable to do much about it.
Grabs back his 3rd position.
My car was really good. It looks like we just don't have the legs that the BMs have anymore. And you know, I drove the best that I could, and I'm sure Dion had something in reserve, so I really don't know what to expect. I think it'll just be luck that'll win Opal's way. It's going to be a while before we taste winning again.
A somber and pessimistic outlook from the Opal driver as the cars start the 2nd race of the day. Briggs not only found opposition from the Winfield BMW, but found Leon Marais giving him a hard time in the early stages. The Swartkorps track proved to be even more tricky when the Class A cars caught the slower Class C traffic. Grant McCleary and Chris Clark arrived at the same spot at the same time, and the resulting spin put paid to McCleary's chance for points. With 2 laps remaining, Dion broke the gear lever on the BMW and was forced to pull off the track. Mike could hardly believe his eyes as he passed the stricken BM and drove on to claim 9 points for his win. Tony was back in action for the one-heat race at Kyalami, and to prove his point, went out and won the Class A race. Robbie Smith appeared at Kyalami with renewed speed and scored a 3rd place, pushing Briggs to a lowly 4th spot. This success convinced Smith to make the long trip to Cape Town for the 10th round of the championship. Opel's problem started when Roddy Turner's fuel pump ended his race before he finished the warm-up lap. Robbie Smith gave Tony Viana a run for his money at the front of the field, while Dion Joubert and Mike Briggs fought for 3rd. The race finished in favour of Viana, with Robbie Smith 2nd and Mike Briggs 3rd. In Heat 2, Robbie showed a clean set of heels, or was it a clean pair of exhaust pipes to the factory cars. Tony Viana and Mike Briggs took up station in 2nd and 3rd places respectively, while Dion Joubert, who had a bad start, worked his way up the field. Roddy Turner would rather have been at Clifton Beach. Dion Joubert had joined the Briggs-Viana feud, which had distracted from Smith's efforts up front. We relive the closing moment of the race with the help of commentator Alan Johnson.
But Briggs has an answer as they go through the twisty sections of the course, and time after time there's a fight on his hands, almost door handle to door handle stuff as they storm down towards Continental Corner. Into Continental Corner, Tony Viana goes through, Briggs holds the inside line and keeps Joubert in 3rd place. Briggs doesn't seem to have an answer for Viana as they go into the tight sections of the course. Viana using every trick in the book to make that track as narrow as possible for Briggs. Down the back straight towards Stannic Corner. Viana holding on to the brakes as they go into the bend, forcing Briggs to slow down. Viana quicker out of the corners. And then as they come out of Stannic Corner for the last time, the 2 cars touching. Nobody's giving way here. And as Robbie Smith comes across to win the heat, it's a big O for both Viana and Briggs behind. Viana out onto the grass and into a spin. Briggs managing to keep the car under control and getting back onto the tarmac. And Viana ending up facing the opposite direction. Let's take a look once again at that incredible incident at the end of the 2nd heat of this Stannic Group N event.
"21 days later, with the heat of the moment forgotten, the drivers gathered at Goldfields for the 2nd last race of the season. Jeff Goddard had been called in to drive for Tony, who since Killarney had been hospitalized due to his illness. Every car carried a message wishing him well. Welkom was never going to be easy for the Opels, the long back straight giving the BMWs a chance to stretch their legs. Robbie Smith had flashes of Hollywood as he outbraked everyone on the track by simply not using them at all. Mike Briggs suffered the effect of Robbie's newfound overtaking style, effectively allowing the 2 Winfield BMWs to take the honours unchallenged. 2 hours later, Jeff Goddard, Roddy Turner and Farouk Dangor came together at the end of the back straight, leaving the midfield 3 cars short and spreading the race out. Dion Joubert and Robbie Smith, having found the brake pedal, drove in tandem around the Goldfields track until the flag came out to give Dion another 9 points. Mike Briggs would have dearly liked to have had Tony Viana racing at the final round at Kyalami in October. Without Tony present, Mike would win the Class A championship without even competing, and that's not how Mike wanted it won. Tony did not make the line, and because of that, much of the Class A punch was missing from the front of the field. Credit must go to Dion and Robbie, who came home 1st and 2nd in both heats, keeping the BMW flag flying for the man who had put so much time and dedication into the 325IS but could not be there himself. Mike Briggs was there and did what he had to do to complete the 1992 Stannic Group N season. In doing so, he carried away the Class A honours. Tony Viana, despite his absence, held on to second place, ahead of teammate Dion Joubert.